Happy People Cast. I'm Sophia Lemon, and I'm talking to Melissa Twist again today from Melissa Twist Events, and we're talking about wedding planning. Woohoo!
Yay!
How are you, Melissa?
I am great.
Or has anything changed since the last time we spoke?
Nope, same old planning, getting excited for the 2024 season. How about you?
Same. And
Yeah.
also kind of just enjoying winter at this point because there's actually snow outside now.
It's actually here. It stayed for a full week, which I feel has not been something that has happened in a while. So that, yeah, it's very exciting.
It's
Winter
true.
is here.
Finally. I put my winter tires on, so there better be snow. That's all I have to say. So this is our second podcast we're recording in a little bit of a wedding planning series. And basically, we're coming at this series from the perspective of your wedding can be whatever the heck you want it to be. You just have to figure out what that is first. And that's basically the topic of our last episode, which was our first episode of this wedding planning series. So if you haven't listened to that, I highly recommend that you just go back and listen to that one first, just in case. I'll put the link in the show notes. But if you have, then we are ready to get started. So I wanted to start with what the difference is between a wedding planner and any of these other wedding vendors who you might mistake as wedding planners. For example, a decorator or a venue coordinator, because all of these things are very different. And yet I do see a lot of couples approaching all three of these people as if they are a wedding planner. So, Melissa.
Yeah, so let's break it down. Well, I'll start with the venue coordinator. So in past positions before I had my own company, I acted as a venue coordinator, so I can speak directly to it. And just to simplify it, is that it's in their title, venue coordinator. So they are only concerned about aspects of that are controlled by the venue. So if that's the logistics of when you're opening the venue, closing the venue, and if they're providing the in-house catering, they're also concerned with the food and beverage details. So specific aspects of the wedding that are tied to the venue. They're not going to be helping you with any of the logistics or the planning outside of what is the venue. So that's just to kind of break it down and to simplify it. Is a lot of clients are like, oh no, we don't need a wedding planner, we have a venue coordinator. And that could be, okay, good luck, because they're not going to be concerned with any of the other vendors, any of the logistics, any of the planning that's outside of the scope of the venue. So it is really important to have that understanding. And then when it comes to the decorator, there is some wedding planners that do take care of the decorating aspect of things. But like myself, I don't have my own inventory of decor. I find that trends are constantly evolving and changing. So I work directly with rental companies. So I don't have my own inventory, but some wedding coordinators do take that on as an aspect of their business. But having that be very clear at the beginning, because decorators, it's exactly that. They're coming in with their inventory and they're just taking care of the decor for the reception, the ceremony. They're not dealing with any of the planning or logistics or vendors that a wedding planner would be dealing with. So they're specifically dealing with the decor. So is that doing pipe and drape? Drapes from the ceiling, lighting, bringing in specific decor items that you're looking for. So they're specific just to the design and then decor of the actual space. And then typically we work with a decor person and then also a florist. So sometimes that's separate items. Sometimes they can do both in one. So specifically with a wedding planner, it's such a broad, because the wedding planner is there from the very start to help support you in your design, your concept, the planning, the invitations, sourcing the dress, sourcing all of your vendors, bringing everyone together, bringing your concepts together. So wedding planner is like the full on kind of taking care of all aspects of the wedding. And they're typically there from the beginning of the planning process to help support you through your planning. So I know that was a lot, but I don't know if there's specific questions that you had for me that we want to dive in a little bit more. But to simplify it, wedding planners, it's like there from the very beginning and helping with all the logistics planning, everything, where the venue coordinator is specific just to the venue.
Mhm. So I wind up seeing a lot of confusion for people right after they've booked a venue. And so they have spoken with the venue coordinator, and often the venue coordinators give the couple the itinerary for the day, which is like the same itinerary they do for absolutely every wedding that they do. And I think
Yes.
that's the piece that might confuse couples, where they're like, oh, well, they gave us the itinerary and therefore they're coordinating the whole wedding. But it's not quite the same thing. And you also don't have to accept the itinerary that the venue coordinator gives you, because they're basing that on their convenience, not on what your wedding plans are. So if when they hand you the itinerary, you don't like it, don't think that you need to just go along with that. Um, Now,
Yeah, I
in
find
my
that so many people feel because they're unsure, right? This is typically the first time they're going through a process like that. So they're like, okay, well, I guess this is the timeline, and they just go with it.
yeah, 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 for sure. Um, the other thing I've noticed with venue coordinators, and this is something that you'll want to be aware of with your wedding planner as well, and I know that you can speak to this, is
Hmm.
in nearly 14 years of business, I have worked with one venue coordinator who is good. Usually they're like overwhelmed with work, and they're typically not very good at answering emails and stuff like that. So don't mistake your venue coordinator as your wedding coordinator, because that'll get you in some sticky situations. And also, if you're contacting wedding planners and they are not responding to your emails, for the love of God, don't hire them.
I know I know it should be my slogan. I answer emails. And this is like something that's like, wow. Because there is a lot of vendors that I do work with that are slow to communicate. Let's just say that.
Yeah. And we're going to go through a little bit of like what you need from your vendors in this episode. We just want to start out with the planning part of it, but that's going to be a big one. Responsive. You
Yes.
need vendors who are responsive.
Yes.
So put that at the top of your
Yeah,
list.
communication is key. Customer service is key. And if those are important to you, working with vendors that clearly understand that.
Mhm.
Each vendor I find works a little bit differently, but I think it's super important that once a couple goes to contract with a vendor, there should be no questions. Their process should be clearly laid out in terms of now what's going to happen after contract has been signed to their actual wedding date. And there should be no confusion on, okay, is there meetings happening? What needs to be communicated at what time? Where is there additional money that needs to come in, deposits, etc.? It should be all outlined in a document or an email directly to the client. Because unfortunately, that isn't the case. And a lot of times, clients just want to know what's going on, and it shouldn't have to be a guessing game for them. And they shouldn't have to track down their vendors to get that information. It should be communicated right at the beginning of the process of working with that specific vendor. So everyone's on the same page.
Mhm. I agree. And
Yes.
another big thing, I mean, after they're communicating with you by email and everything, and you need to have a meeting with them, make sure that you actually like these people, because you're going to be working with them
Yes.
possibly for over a year. And you want to enjoy yourself. So work with people that you like. So have that meeting with them. Make sure that they're answering all of your questions, answering your communications, and giving you all the information that you need.
Yeah.
Someone like Melissa is going to be someone who can help you a lot with like communicating with the vendors and making sure that she has all that information.
Women are often celebrated as the pillars of our community, but we also face significant health risks impacting our well being and our full potential. Now, more than ever, we need women to feel healthy, empowered, and confident in making bold decisions that serve us and our community. In celebration of International Women's Week, join me, Leah Van Dolder, registered dietitian and mindset coach, at the Women's Wealth and Wellness Summit. It's happening here on March the 5th at the Georgian Bay Hotel in Collingwood. At the summit, women, you will learn how to unlock your limitless potential and maximize your health and impact so you can live an abundant life. For more summit details, visit leahvandolder.com/wealthinwellness.
Hi, I'm Becky Waples, the host of the Small Towns Big Dreams podcast. The podcast that celebrates small town creators and shares their stories. From their background to where they found their courage, from their challenges to their wins, from where they found their inspiration to how they took their first step, join us each week to hear how each guest turned their big dreams into reality. If you are a creator, an entrepreneur, or love someone who is, subscribe now to the Small Towns Big Dreams podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and let's grow together.
People planning weddings don't pay enough attention to. You need to have a contract with basically all of your vendors, everyone that you're going to be working with. And I have heard horror stories about this. I have not seen this too much because I have always had contracts and have worked with couples who have been signing contracts. But I have heard horror stories about, booking a photographer, for example, and there's no contract. And then like 2 weeks before the wedding, it's like, oh, we can't actually photograph your wedding. So you need to have a contract, and you should be paying a retainer or a deposit or whatever.
Yes.
Often contracts are not valid until there is money exchanged. So you need to do that part. And those things both need to be done before I suggest you feel comfortable with the fact that you have this vendor booked. Like, don't go by email or a phone call or a text message saying, yes, I've put it in my calendar. You need to have the contract and the deposit taken care of before you can feel comfortable.
Yes.
I think.
A lot of clients that I work with are exactly that. They want to feel that they are locked in with that specific vendor for their specific wedding date. And that is exactly what they want. They want to have a signed contract. They want to have put a deposit down, and that reassures them that, that's booked. I know this vendor. I have them locked in for my wedding date. So it is super important. I would not feel comfortable recommending or working with a vendor that chooses not to do both.
Yeah, absolutely. Out of curiosity, as a wedding planner, is there anything that you've seen in contracts or not in contracts? Things in contracts that shouldn't be there, things not in contracts that should be there. Are there specific things that have come up for your clients over and over again that, just off the top of your head, that you think people need to remember when they're, contracting?
I find that there hasn't really been a common theme that I've noticed with vendor contracts. I feel like it's unique to my couples. Sometimes they're concerned with some of these add-on costs is one of the ones that do come up, where they're unsure of, like, okay, there is this major fee, but then there's kind of like all these little add-ons where it's unclear of what the total amount's going to be. An example of that is depending on how many staff there's going to be driving independently of each other. For example, a band contract that just went out is that they might have 6 band members traveling in 6 different vehicles, and the client is responsible for their kilometers. And so it's a little thing that it might not add up to a large chunk of change, but it still is something that the clients want to have an understanding of, like, okay, exactly how much is kilometers going to be? How much is, the meal's going to be? Like, they want the transparency in some of these like add-on costs that might come up with working with these specific vendors. So having transparency there is typically one of the things we go back and forth on, is understanding exactly what that vendor is going to need, because sometimes it is the unknown. Are we doing overnight accommodation for that vendor? How many rooms are we going to need to book? That can just be an unknown, and it can end up being a large cost because rooms can only, sometimes go from $300 to $400 a night in this area. So having clarity on that, and sometimes that vendor isn't able to get that information until closer to the date. So we have to kind of budget for worst case scenario, and in terms of, are they going to be taking, it is 5 different cars and not carpooling or whatever it may be. Yeah.
Yeah, if I found that in a contract, I'd be like, that's weird. That could result in quite a range
Yes.
of additional fees. Yeah, for sure. I
I
would
mean,
want to know
I
about
help
that.
them, like some vendors are it's a small thing, but sometimes vendors are very specific with what they need for their meal. One contract I just read, they need a protein and veg, and they need to have a dessert option. So sometimes it's just me reading through their contract and just being like, let's just avoid this altogether, and get them Visa gift cards, and they can go and figure out their protein and veg and dessert by themselves. Because sometimes that might not be, the type of menu that my clients are doing. They're doing maybe all past or stations or whatever it may be. So just trying to avoid conflict on the actual wedding day by being proactive.
Excellent. I like that. I don't read other vendors' contracts, so I'm not really familiar with the variety of different things that people might put in them. So that's interesting. All right. So what I've done, Melissa, as I have mentioned to you before we got onto, before we started recording, is I went ahead and looked up a wedding planning checklist. And we're going to go through this checklist and just see if this is all the stuff that we need to be doing before a wedding or not. And I would like to reiterate that even what we have mentioned so far, when you're planning your wedding, you don't have to do any of it. You can do whatever the heck you want, but you do need to figure out what you want to do. So again, if you have not listened to the previous episode with Melissa, go back and listen to that episode now and figure out what you want before you start planning. Okay, we're getting into this checklist. I will not put the link in the show notes, but I will tell you that it is currently for sale for $6.73 on Etsy. So if you need to go desperately need to go find a wedding checklist, there you go. Okay, so this wedding planning checklist starts at 12 months out from your wedding. The first task is not to get engaged. It is, in fact, to decide on your budget.
So we just skip over that step? Get engaged? Like, oh.
I think we're just assuming that has happened.
Okay.
Okay, so the first
be a little
thing,
awkward if it hasn't.
It would be. So this is suggesting that you decide on your budget and like narrow down 3 to 5 dates at 12 months out. But I don't necessarily agree with that decide on a budget thing. I think you really need to know what your goals are before you do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that if it is important to decide if there is a specific season that or if there is, sometimes I work with couples where they have a date that's significant to them. So they want to get married on that date. So that's something that, yes, needs to be decided sooner than later, especially if you're not going to do a private property, wedding where you have full access and you are working with a venue, because they're going to want to know, do we have even the availability to accommodate what you're looking for? So it is good. Sometimes I have clients that are like, as long as it's like they have like a range, like sometimes it's 3 months. So just even if you have an idea to go off of, and it's just truly just to determine if the venue's, available or not. But still, there's Friday weddings, there's Sunday weddings. So if you're open to that, if the Saturday, it still seems to be the most popular date to have your wedding, but there still is flexibility there that if you want to get married in this month, but you're open to a weekday or a Friday or a Sunday, it shouldn't be a hard stop. And hey, no, if you're open to doing it on different dates, then potentially it could still work out for the season that you're looking for, the month or whatever it may be. As I feel there is this extreme pressure of like, all venues get booked up a year to
Mhm.
14, 16 months advance. That is not the case. Like
Yeah.
I've worked with venues a month out. Anything's possible. It just needs to be available. And there's ebbs and flows in the wedding season. And sometimes, 1 year, July could be like fully booked, and the next year it could be really quiet. So there's no, I feel just every year it's just different depending on what couples are looking for.
Definitely. Um, okay, so decide on your budget. Decide on your budget after you figured out what you want. You might want to
Yes.
talk to a wedding planner. The good news is it says under the 12-month box, hire a wedding planner, although that seems to come after your guest list and picking your venue. So I would say
Yeah.
put your wedding planner up at the top.
Yes, because the wedding planner, and sometimes you're not sure where you want to get married. And so I support clients with that venue search. So, we would jump on a call and kind of discuss what you're looking for in a venue. And then I would make suggestions to you. And then we could do site visits together. So because can be very overwhelming, depending on where you're looking to get married, there could be so many different options, and you're just completely unsure on where to even start. So I would work with you directly to kind of figure out what is important to you in a venue, and then make suggestions from that conversation.
For sure. I have to say that one of the coolest weddings I photographed was like just off of the Bruce Trail in a field.
Yes.
Like, so when we're going through this checklist is obviously designed for people who are like booking a venue and are being handed an itinerary and everything. And this is
Yes.
kind of the point. You can't decide your budget if you don't know what it is that you want. You
Yes.
can't pick a venue until you know what it is that you want, unless you want that venue. So yeah, keep in mind that all of this can be vastly different. And, if you're wanting to get married in a field somewhere, what you have to deal with might be accessibility. So your grandmother can wheel her wheelchair to the ceremony site, So there's different
Yes.
things that you have to deal with for different types of weddings.
Yes. And I did a similar to you, where one of my favorite weddings was just 2 years ago, where it was exactly like that. The ceremony happened off of the Bruce Trail, and then we did a buyout of a restaurant for the reception.
That'd be nice. That'd be really nice.
Yes.
Excellent. All right. So still at 12 months out, it says research your vendors. If you're planning a Saturday wedding in the height of wedding season, in Canada anyway, where it snows for part of the year, you might want to be doing that sooner, maybe. To be honest with you, a lot of my weddings book like 18 months out. So if you're doing this 12 months out, it might be a challenge.
Yes.
But I would just recommend to people like use social media and stuff. Just have an idea of like what sort of visuals you like, what kind of food you like, what restaurants you like. Most of them will cater. Yeah, just an idea of like start dreaming it up, I guess, and follow
Yes.
people on social media so you know the types of vendors that you like, because that'll make your life a lot easier.
For sure. And I always say that if there's only one of that particular vendor, so if they don't have associates, or if they don't have a team, that's when it's harder. If there's only one of that person and they're already booked on your wedding date, we have to look elsewhere. So sometimes clients are like, they have a certain vendor in mind for whatever aspect of that. Let's say it's the caterer. They know they want to work with this specific team or group, but then the rest they're flexible with. Then we have a little bit more wiggle room, right? Is that we can expand our catchment area and potentially look outside of where you're getting, because sometimes vendors will travel an hour or 2 hours. So it's not to say that, like, I've hired vendors like 3 weeks out, but we've had to expand our catchment area. Sometimes they're driving 2 or 3 hours to get to the wedding, and then there comes with extra costs for that specific vendor, because it's their time, their travel time. Are we paying for overnight accommodation? So that's typically where clients and I will have a discussion with, is like, do we want to source as much stuff as locally? Because if we start sourcing vendors from out of their service area, then that's when we get into additional budget needed for travel, overnight, kilometers, etc.
Good
Yeah. So
point.
yeah, so a lot of times my clients do want to work as much as possible with local because they don't want to have these fees in addition to what the vendor's costs are.
Yeah, which makes sense.
Yes.
All right. So we're going on to, well, okay, there's also says under 12 months, order, save the dates, and throw an engagement party.
I
But
find that everyone's going online. I would say 90% of my clients use websites for their save the dates.
mhm,
And typically there's no hard and fast rule with that. I always say try to get them out earlier opposed to later if you know that a lot of your guests will be flying, because it's
mhm,
that much harder for them to book vacation and want to make sure that they're booking their travel plans potentially around your wedding. But if most people are local, I don't think that that's the urgency of like, I don't know, a lot of people that are planning their social calendar, 12, 14, 16 months out. So a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, I've missed the save the date timeline. I'm like, don't worry about it. Like most people don't know what they're doing, 14 months from now on that specific Saturday. So there is a lot of concern of people thinking that if they've they've missed that date on their timeline document that they now need to push their wedding another year. And I'm like,
no.
really the only time I say that it might is that if you're looking for a lot of people to come to your wedding that are international or out of province or type thing. So yeah.
That totally makes sense. I get that.
Yeah.
Excellent. So 10 to 12 months before your wedding, it says book your photographer, florist, caterer, event rentals, your officiant. Yeah, let's talk about that. Again, photographer, like if you're planning a Saturday wedding, I suggest reaching out to them sooner than 10 to 12 months. But outside of that, what are your suggestions?
I find that again, it goes back to the point that I was just making. It's like if you have a specific aesthetic or photographer that you're looking at, and there's only one of them, you need to be booking as soon as possible. If you're more, casual about some of your other vendors, there's not that urgency of like, okay, I know I really want this. There is options. And it's hard because it's like I've booked officiants 6 weeks out from the wedding date. Like
Yeah.
I've done it all, right? So there's just, again, it just comes back to availability. And sometimes vendors will charge a little bit more if they see it as being a last minute booking. I'm not sure if you've seen that personally, is that, and everyone's kind of, what is a last minute? How do you define a last minute booking? Is that 6 months out? Is that 4 weeks out? Is that one day out?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Have you seen that with other vendors that you've worked with personally?
I've seen it with some, but to be honest with you, not so much with weddings. But I could
Yeah.
see that becoming more of a thing when people start booking like the Wednesdays more frequently.
Yeah.
Because that, for me, that becomes more of an issue with like family sessions where they're more likely to book last minute. Weddings tend not to book last minute. But yeah, I do know of like business owners who have that sort of a practice. Just haven't seen it myself at a wedding.
Yeah.
But
So for example, like I had a client last year that all of a sudden she decided she wanted makeup 3 weeks out from her wedding date, and everyone local was already booked. So we
yeah.
just expanded our service area. So we brought in a makeup artist that was available, but she was from 2 hours from where the wedding was. So there's an example of like 3 weeks out. It just means we need to allocate more of a budget to that because it is that additional dollars that we're going to need for travel time and the last minute booking.
So
So
yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
I find that that's it's a hard one to, because again, I've had clients who are like, okay, I've missed this time frame. Now it's like we won't be able to get these vendors. And
Yeah.
it just means being more flexible and maybe being able to allocate more of a budget to that vendor if we're going to do things at, different timelines closer to the wedding date, etc.
Mhm. Also a good reason to really figure out what you want as soon as
Yes.
you can.
Yes.
What about caterers and florists? Because I know that with both, there can be a certain amount of, what is available at the time of the wedding stuff, especially with regards to flowers. So, do you have any suggestions for people when they're booking their florist or their caterer and they're especially flowers so far out and not
Yes.
knowing what will be available? What do you suggest or what do people need?
So I'm finding more and more florists are being very particular of understanding what your base budget is. So
Mhm.
florists are being, and this is something, a trend that I've seen kind of over the last 2 years, is that they would not want to work with a couple if they didn't have a minimum budget of X. So that's something that, I would work with the couple on to like fully, because a lot of times they think, oh, we can do this with this amount of budget. And unfortunately, I have to be the one that has to tell them flowers are really expensive. Try just even going to your local grocery store and trying to put something together for a minimal budget. It's not possible.
Mhm.
So really having a grasp on what you want to spend on florals, and typically if you have a certain aesthetic in mind. So there's some florists that I love working with because I love their aesthetic and they always knock it out of the park. So if you have florists that you've been following and you really like their work, you want to lock in their date. And typically what's happening is the florist won't even start communicating in terms of like the concept or floral type until 6 months out from the wedding date, because things are always changing. So they want to have a better understanding of what's going to be available for their specific wedding date. So they're not doing these like large conceptual concepts or putting the design together until closer to the wedding date. That's been the trend that I've been seeing over the last couple of years. So if again, it goes back to if you have a specific style or aesthetic in mind, reaching out to that florist and getting them booked in for that date. And it isn't until typically closer to the wedding date that you start actually working on the design,
Mhm.
color palette, and concept of the wedding.
Mhm.
With the caterer, again, it's the same thing. If you have a specific style of food or type of food that you really like, and there's only one of that type of caterer in your area, I definitely suggest locking in the date as soon as possible and then working with them closer to the wedding date and exactly what the food concept is going to look like. Obviously, you want to make sure that they can accommodate dietary restrictions. And there is more and more making sure that there is plenty of options for the vegan vegetarians that will be just joining your wedding as a guest. So knowing that they'll be able to accommodate that. But again, it's something that with the menus, they're not doing tastings and working on the menu until closer to the wedding date.
Mhm. I would suggest these days, especially if you're having a larger wedding, you're probably going to have people in your guest list that are vegan or vegetarian.
Yeah.
We're definitely going in the direction of a lot of people ceasing
Yes.
to eat meat. So if you're
Yeah.
having anything that's like remotely close to a large wedding, I would be just considering having a vegan, vegetarian option or multiple options.
Yes.
Because often it's like a side thought and it comes out in a different dish and goes to one person and it's awkward.
Yes.
So
I
maybe,
always am like, even if none of your guests told you that this needs to happen, we are still going to prepare as if they did. So yes, it's
Mhm.
something that is, because it is, oh yeah, I forgot. Or maybe they've changed their
Yeah,
dietary preferences from when they put in their meal request. So it's just something that's a
true,
standard, I feel like, for catering.
true. And I have to say that the vegan vegetarian meals are usually really good.
Yes.
All right. We'll move on to 8 to 10 months before the wedding. That is apparently when you should purchase a wedding dress.
Hmm.
I don't know. Have you run into trouble with that?
When you, this is like a loaded question because it's like sometimes you're getting a dress that you're trying on, but then they're ordering from overseas. And sometimes that process can take 3 to 4 months for it even to come in. And then the alterations start. And that's what kills me. I'm just like, sometimes it's going through 2 to 3 appointments for alterations to get your final dress. And in between those alterations, it can take, what I think is an extremely long time, which I think people aren't prepared for. They're like, oh, come and do my fitting. They'll, make some changes, and then 24 hours later, I could be back for my second fitting. But that process can be painfully slow. And, sometimes through alterations, I've seen 3, 4 months it's taken to get the final product. So, but again, that's a specific type of person that maybe like you can just go to everyone, there's different things that you could do, going to a vintage shop and getting something off of the rack. It is crazy how much some of my clients will spend on their wedding dress. And I'm like, are you sure? Because it is a large chunk of the budget. And I ask them to reimagine it. If it's not something that's super important to them, why are they spending anywhere between $5,000 to $10,000 of their budget on a dress that they're only wearing for like 6, 7 hours, and they're not even comfortable in it, and they can't go to the washroom and all the things. So I asked them to, reimagine what it looks like. It doesn't need to be this huge expense. Can you go and get something beautiful, budget off the rack, vintage? And I've even had some brides where they've rented a beautiful dress for the evening. There's some beautiful, like some stellar companies in the city that rent out couture dresses. So there's different options.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am all for the different options, even with like flowers. And I really hope that no florists listen to this because I am not knocking it at all. Wedding flowers can be like stunning, but they are expensive. So unless you really like care about that, like don't go in and like spend all of your money on the flowers. Same with the dress. Like the dress that fits you the best could be $20 on Amazon. It could be like $20,000 at a bridal shop. So don't tie what you want to the dollar amount. Find what it is that you want and go and do that.
Yes.
What about booking a band or a DJ 8 to 10 months out?
Yes.
Yes.
Again, it's something that if you're particular on a certain type of band or music that you're looking for, trying to get that booked sooner than later. Because again, once they're booked, they're booked. But if you're flexible on who you want to work with, that doesn't necessarily need to happen during that time.
What about
it goes back to like, what are the most important vendors or elements of your wedding day? And if you're not going to waver on that, I go, you know what, let's just pull the trigger right now. You know that this is going to be something that it's not going to go away. I have a client right now where I ask them to just reflect. I go, they're, kind of going back and forth about, is the investment for a band going to be worth it? And I go, the next day when you're reflecting on your wedding, are you going to be upset and be still thinking about, I wish we got that band? And if the answer is yes, let's go to contract. Because that's like, it's a no-brainer, right? It's just, it is hard sometimes, but you have to reallocate your budget to those things that are super important to you, and that you're going to be disappointed at the end of the day if it doesn't come together.
I'm interrupting this regularly scheduled content to ask you for a little favor. If this pod has made you laugh, inspired you, or made you think, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a moment of our shenanigans. And don't be shy. Share the love by leaving a rating and a review. It's like a virtual high five that helps introduce the show to more ridiculously happy people and helps keep me on track with the content that you actually want to hear. So grab your device, unless, of course, you're driving, and spread the love. Subscribe, rate, and review Ridiculously Happy Peoplecast. You know how to do it. Your support means the world to us. And we're back in 3, 2, 1. Excellent advice.
Mm-hmm.
What about hairstylist and makeup artist? This is the one that I find people get into the most trouble with.
Yes.
And for some reason, we'll leave it to the last minute. But like a makeup artist is only working one wedding in a day, probably. Or you're lucky if the timing works that they can get from one venue to your venue and before your ceremony and do makeup for you or even everyone or whatever. So what are you finding? You will obviously have way more experience than me with the actual booking of the hair and makeup. I assume it's the same thing. If there's someone in particular you like, book as soon as you can.
As
But
possible.
I would recommend booking your hair and makeup more than 8 to 10 months before, if you are planning more than 8 to 10 months before, because
Yes.
yeah.
And if possible, doing trials, because it's like that's the worst thing to see someone's portfolio. Like if you haven't got a reference from, a friend of yours that's gotten married or was in a bridal party, et cetera, is like really, their portfolio might look a certain way online, but then it might not be the right fit, like when you're actually doing a trial. So I definitely do recommend to brides to do a trial with their makeup and hair person so that they get all those kind of like, okay, this is the look I'm going for, have like the, pictures of the aesthetic that you're looking for hair and makeup, and be able to go through that trial. That's where you get to test different things. Oh, I was thinking about this, and then you look at it and you're like, maybe not. Because at the end of the day, you want to look like yourself, and or sometimes people are like, no, I don't want to look
They want
like
to look different. Yeah.
so I've seen it all. So I think it's super important to try to get a trial in before you go to contract with that vendor, because sometimes it's just not the right fit. So definitely recommend trial before going to contract.
I totally agree with having hair and makeup trials. Like, I'm just going to go ahead and say you need to do that. I know a lot of people will be like, oh, it doesn't matter that much to me, but that's actually the most time consuming thing you're going to do on your wedding day. And it's probably the one thing that I've seen that can cause people a lot of anxiety, because if you don't have a plan for the hair and makeup and you sit down and start doing it and it's like, so what are we doing today? There can be a lot of like trial and error, touch-ups, like completely changing
and sometimes
where the direction is going.
My clients have been like horrified, and then they're too nice to actually say anything. So then after they're gone, they're taking the makeup wipes and taking it all off and redoing, pulling out the curls, pulling out the bobby pins, and starting from scratch, which is worst case scenario. So you don't want to be dealing with any of that.
And if any of that sort of stuff, like if running late makes you feel anxious, do your trials.
Yes.
And just have it figured out in advance and make all of your bridesmaids go and do trials, and like just otherwise you're going to feel anxious on the day of.
And I always kind of build that. That's something that I work with, depending on, sometimes these wedding parties are large, and then they have mums and grandmoms and aunts and all the things. So I make sure to be like, okay, our main concern is the bride, and then all these other people can kind of figure it out. So if other people are affecting the timeline, showing up late if let's say that they're the first one, and I always kind of like, because it is that painful thing of who's going to be the first people in the chair at like 6, sometimes we're starting at 5:30, 6 in the morning, and people agree, but then they actually don't come on time, and then that pushes everything back. So I try to kind of get ahead of that and making sure that the person that signed up for those first time slots are actually going to be on time. Then it can affect the rest of the day, that kind of snowball effect of, okay, now everything's behind.
That
Yeah.
is the one that tends to do it.
Yeah, because it is the pressure. I talk to makeup and hair artists all the time, and they're like, that is what causes them so much stress because they're there, they've
Yeah.
set everything up, they're ready to go, but they can't start their job until people are actually physically there in their chairs. So it causes this pressure because they know, okay, the photographer's coming in at this time, everyone needs to be ready. So I typically leave a good buffer there, knowing that that tends to be a common theme that does come up, and then making sure that there's key people that could start with photography if we
Mhm.
still are working on getting a few faces done. So kind of buffering that in as well, like the people that aren't immediately in photos right away, they're the ones that are the last to get their hair and makeup done.
And
The
just
random
some,
aunt that isn't part of like the formals that we need to get done right before ceremony, if that was happening, right?
for sure. And just a little piece of advice from a photographer: you do not need photos of all of your hair and makeup. You don't. You just get the photographer to arrive at like the tail end when you're doing
Yes.
touch-ups and stuff, and you don't need more than that.
Yes, I learned that no one said that during my wedding. It's always something, a piece of advice that I give to my clients. I'm like, do you really want these photos where half makeup on, half off? People are just kind of like all over the place. I'm like, I'm not, and no one gave me that advice. Because it's just you think, okay, well, I need this. This is the package. And it's like 2 hours of a photographer there just getting like, no, I do exactly what you said. Let's get the photographer in at the tail end and maybe some posts, fake some shots if you want
Yeah.
certain shots. But there's no need to be there 2-3 hours beforehand to be getting ready photos, right?
Yeah, and I have to say, if you fake any photos at your wedding, you're going to be really happy with them later because,
Yes.
yeah, they usually turn out pretty well in comparison to what they might have
Yeah.
looked like in reality. All right. Da, 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 da. Plan ceremony and reception decor 8 to 10 months before. I mean, I think you should just spend all of your time having fun doing that, to be honest with you.
Yeah. You can be your decor and tablescape and all that stuff can be constantly evolving, like right up into the wedding weekend. Like there's no, a lot of times my clients are sourcing a lot of their decor items themselves and they love that, right? Like that's sometimes the fun part for them is getting creative and sourcing different things. And so there's no, that can be happening all the way up to the wedding day in my mind.
6 to 8 months before, this is the last box. It says to decide on your bridesmaids' dresses. Whew.
Mm.
Purchase wedding bands, and wedding bands being your rings. Plan or book your honeymoon. Create a song list for your ceremony and your reception. And then it says book your rehearsal dinner venue and block out hotel rooms for your out of town guests. So nothing that exciting with regard to vendors.
Yeah.
Except for maybe booking your rehearsal dinner venue. And I suggest just going somewhere where you really like the food.
Yes. Sometimes I have couples where they have a very large group, so we have to do a buyout of like a private room sometimes, just because the group can't just be accommodated by just making a large reservation. So it really just depends on what you're looking to do. I find more and more of my couples are going more casual with their rehearsals and having it done at a family property and just doing a barbecue and have it being more open, like open house. So not formal at all, like come for an hour, come for a couple hours, say hi, and not having it be as formal as they had been in the past.
So this checklist isn't so bad, I guess. But definitely geared towards like planning your traditional wedding. So
Yeah.
I think the advice is keep track of the vendors that you like.
Yes.
And if there's someone you really like, book them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I had a client that booked They knew when they wanted to get married, and they had a photographer in mind that they loved. And so they booked the photographer before they had even got engaged because they knew the engagement was coming. They didn't
Yeah.
want to risk
Yeah.
not being able to work with a specific photographer. So I thought that was a little ballsy, but it worked for them.
I know.
So that's definitely not in a timeline.
The one thing that I will say is if you are getting like a checklist like this, nothing has to happen at the like time frame that these checklists suggest. Like again, you get to do anything the way that you want it to be.
Yeah.
I find that when people run into trouble, it's because they're not speaking up about what they want. So like someone starts railroading the whole wedding situation, or even if we make it as an example, the hair and makeup thing. It's not quite the way that you want it, but you don't say anything about it. And that's when, you're later on, you're going to look through your photos and you're going to think, ugh, I didn't like my makeup all day. And I don't like my
Yes.
photos and like all of that stuff. Like you need to like know what it is that you do want and then stand up for that,
Yes.
you know?
And it's a new service I kind of started, I guess now it's been 2 years, but I call it consulting. So it's like you don't need to commit to the full like wedding package or day of month of coordination. If you know that you need support, but just a little bit of support at either the beginning or middle of your wedding planning process, I offer consultation sessions with couples. So ask me all the questions. You want vendor referrals, you need support on your floor plan or seating chart or design or any aspect of the wedding planning process. And I find that really works with a certain type of couple where they want to they want to do everything themselves. And, that works for some people, but then they just need a little bit of support here and there through the wedding planning process. So it's a minimum of 5 hours, and sometimes people use that all up in like a couple planning sessions, or sometimes it's just kind of check-ins throughout the planning process, like, hey, can we jump online for an hour? I have questions about this. Can you support me with this? So it's something that is available. If you reach out to me at info@melissatwist.ca, I can send you more information about it. But I find that it's a nice little option for people that aren't looking for the full planning.
Well, sometimes you just don't need the person there on the day of, right? I think that's
Yeah.
genius. I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Especially if it's like, hey, we're going to sit down and I'm going to ask you about vendors, right? Like what vendors do you
Yes.
recommend and all of that stuff? Because so honestly, getting a referral from someone or
Yes.
think harder about maybe booking that person, it could be helpful.
Yes. And I find a lot of the time it's, working with someone with, what people ask, why do you work with the wedding planner? It's like, I've already done the research. I already know the people. So the time that you would have spent researching this and that, the other thing, hours and hours and hours of your time, I'm creating efficiencies in that process. So you don't need to do that. So you're not sitting there every single night after work, researching and getting more and more overwhelmed. I take that away from you.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that was brilliant. Well, this is great. I actually think that this is a great spot to end this particular episode.
Awesome.
So basically, you go ahead and just book the people that you like.
The
When you're ready.
people that you want to work with. Yeah. So doing your own research is important. Is like, check out their reviews, check out their comments on Instagram, check out their portfolio, like just things like that. Do a little bit of your own research is always good. And then if you still are, on the fence, I always say to clients, like, why don't you ask them to have them put in touch with a previous client of theirs? Like if you are very concerned about really wanting to make sure that you understand what their previous clients are saying about this specific vendor, that is something that most vendors do offer, but you have to ask, is that when you put me in touch with one of your most recent clients, I want to just chat about their experience with working with that specific vendor.
Excellent. That's really good advice too.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right. And what is your ridiculously happy moment?
So this past week, I just had a couple go to contract with me, and it's really exciting because it's something I had on my vision board in terms of what their inspiration and kind of vibe for their wedding day is. A wedding that I've always wanted to be able to help plan. So that's super exciting for me that I just went to contract with them this week. So I'm excited to start working on their wedding.
Is it the brunch wedding?
No, not yet.
Darn
I'm
it.
still putting that energy out there. It's going to happen one day, but it's not the brunch wedding, but it is a super exciting wedding. So,
If you're currently engaged,
yes.
call Melissa to plan your brunch wedding, please.
Yes.
Thank you. That's awesome. I love that. That's so cool. Were you like talking to this bride and were you like, you mean like this picture that I have right here?
Yes.
That's
I was
awesome.
kind of trying to keep it cool when they were explaining what their concept was and everything. And I was just grinning like so much because I didn't want to fangirl too much, but it was just something that I've been wanting to do for a long time. So I'm super excited.
That's so awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I can't wait to see pictures. All right. My happy moment, I got to work with the ladies at the Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce last week. So I drove up to Aurelia with Katie Ballantyne, a makeup artist. And I'm not sure if you've had a chance to work with Katie yet. But we drove up and I love Katie. And because we drove up together, we finally got to catch up because anytime we see each other, she's doing someone's makeup. So we had 2 hours that day to just chat, which was fantastic, and had a lot of fun with the ladies from the Chamber of Commerce, and they were very funny. So
That's
I laughed a
awesome.
lot. I laughed a lot.
That's amazing.
It was a lot of fun. All right. Where can people find you other than at your email address for their brunch wedding? But go on.
Yes. So melissatwistevents.ca, and then also my Instagram under the same name, Melissa Twist Events.
It's awesome. All right. You can find me on Instagram at Ridiculously Happy People, and on Facebook, and on Pinterest, and at my website at sophialedden.com. If you are not subscribed to the show, please subscribe to the show. And also, if you could just go ahead and leave us a rating and a review in your podcast app of choice. And if you'd like to share your ridiculously happy moment, you can go to happyp.pl/record and you can record it. And we will play it on the show. And thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.